Um, so tonight, Lockie and I will go through around biodiversity citizen science in Nillumbik and the role people can play in that. Lockie is going to do a fair chunk of the talking tonight, but I will jump in at times and I'll just so keep an eye on the chat and and see if people's got questions while Lockie's talking. I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet tonight. The Wurundjeri Woi people is the land I'm on, and they're the traditional owners of the country of which Nillumbik is located. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend respect to all First Nations people, including those that might be joining us tonight. We respect the enduring strength of the Wurundjeri Woi and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And yeah, Lockie, I'll hand over to you now and get you started on tonight's presentation. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Warren. So basically tonight's overview of what we're going to talk about is citizen science data and why it's so important, how you can collect it, the different ways of collecting citizen science data, but also what happens to this data and why it's so important to us. Then at the end, we'll give a few sort of examples of how you can do this locally in Nillumbik, especially to help us understand the ways that we can manage biodiversity better in the Shire. So next slide. So biodiversity data can come in a number of different forms and formats, and it's getting easier and easier to map and manage this data over time. But biodiversity data is crucial to us almost every day as land managers. So throughout the Shire Council, we can use it in planning, other kind of development strategies, infrastructure, on-ground works, emergency management, like with fires, when they're putting fire breaks in and addressing fires, or planning for burns, for some of our strategies. So Warren's just completed our latest biodiversity strategy, which is a huge amount of work. And underpinning that strategy, there is a hell of a lot of data that we process as land managers to help us understand biodiversity in the Shire. So we collaborate across multiple tenures and different land managers like Melbourne Water and Parks Victoria. So there's lots of people looking at this data all of the time and sharing it. So it really is crucial for our day-to-day operations at the Shire. Next one. So data that we're collecting right now, it can help us pre-plan. And so if we've got something on the horizon, a new development or something that we want to work on as council, we can use a lot of this data now to pre-plan for that development or that sort of action, that management action we're going to put in place. You can use it post a disaster. So if we have a fire go through, we'll be able to pull up all of our biodiversity data and have a look at, okay, what was there before the fire or the flood, or what happened there before the drought. You know, we can follow data forwards in time and backwards in time. So some of the data sitting there will have really long-term trends associated with it. So the more data we collect now, the more it's going to help us in 10, 15, 20 years time from now as well. So it won't just be Warren and I looking at this data, but lots and lots of other managers across the Shire and the state will be looking at this data and learning from it. It can help you predict, help you look at unexpected events. So instead of having all of the data accessible all of the time, sometimes there'll be some data and there'll be a flood in a minor tributary of the Diamond Creek, and then we'll be able to go back and look at, oh, look, someone had some data that they'd collected there and there was a weed on this tributary, so we'll be able to get in and manage that weed. So looking at an unexpected event. You can also, the example in the photo that we've got here is this is the garbage collector who was an amateur photographer, and he ended up finding a new species of peacock spider, which is pretty amazing. Just out walking, just recorded his data. And instead of just taking a photo and sitting it on his phone or his computer and just enjoying the photo, he thought, I'm going to submit that to the museum. And it flowed on this huge chain of events where he's actually got a new spider named after him, which is just amazing. But every little bit of data that can contribute can have a really big impact. But there's also the unknown unknowns of it is worth collecting as much data as we possibly can now for the future, and things that we don't understand why we're collecting it. But it really is worth documenting as much as possible about particularly our shire. The next one. That peacock spider documentary is up on ABC if you go hunting for it, I think still, but yeah, it's fascinating. So this next slide is just it was supposed to be a little video. I'm not sure it's going to work, but it was tracking through the deer records from across Victoria going back from the 1920s and 30s. And if the video worked, it would show the dots of the deer spreading from down in Gippsland and spreading right up and across. And currently they're sort of up and around Malmesbury and heading west. So that's the latest map as that last screenshot.
You might come back to that, I think.
Yeah, we should be able to.
Yeah.
So with citizen science data, collecting citizen science data can be in many different forms, from just a simple walk in the park and you might notice something interesting and you record that on your phone, or write it down and enter it in your computer later on. It can be in your backyard. People sort of overlook their backyard and they might go to a local amazing bushland reserve, but there is a lot of data that can be used and help us understand the Shire better, because yeah, 60% of our land mass is private property. So even the small little gardens in Warrandyte and Eltham can have a huge influence on some of our species, and you might get some really interesting things turning up. So never overlook recording things in your backyard. So a friend here in Healesville has over 80 species of insect in his back garden in the last 6 months alone, as he's started up his iNaturalist journey, just recording his different insects. And it's a very small, very simple backyard, but it's really interesting. And the other way of recording citizen science data is an organized event. So it might be through a university, it might be with us, it might be helping out a land care group. There are so many people out doing citizen science work that need volunteers and need help. So if you keep your eyes on our pages and our environment pages, our volunteer pages, you'll see a lot of biodiversity kind of orientated events and environmental events. So you can come and participate on those and record your own data and submit it at the end of it. So yeah, lots of different ways where you contribute in this space. The next one. So this photo is my office floor, so excuse all of the vegetation and dirt and dust underneath my old field office. But this is how we used to attack biodiversity data out in the field, even just 10, 15 years ago. Field guides for every different species, every type of, you got frogs, grasses, reptiles. The yellow book in the middle is scats and tracks, so that's poo and footprints. And then all of the different bird field guides, there's dozens of those, and they all cover a different kind of aspect of birds in Australia. And then different vegetation ones. So there's a huge series called the Flora of Victoria, which is massive volumes that every single plant in the state is documented and listed in. And then there's more simple guides to the more common things. So this is the way we used to do things out in the field, and then you'd write it down on a piece of paper and take it home. But now with phones and tablets and GPS and GIS, things get geo-referenced and sent off to the cloud even. So you can be out in the field with your phone, and you can have all of these field guides on your phone at the one time, and you can take a point where you're standing and send it off, and it's sitting with the land manager even just hours later. So it's pretty amazing what we can do with data, where we used to have to take a veritable library with us out into the field. So things are getting much easier to do this kind of collection of biodiversity data. The next one. So do you want to jump in here, Woz, or do you want?
Yeah, I'll jump in now. So thanks, Lockie. So yeah, like Lockie said, like 10 years ago, you'd carry, a suitcase of field guides and books and, have all these different ways of recording your data if you're a professional ecologist or amateur. But now everything's got an app on your phone or website, and you've got, a whole variety of groups or organizations, universities, having these different apps, and it can get quite confusing at times. What's the best app to use? And there's no simple answer, unfortunately, but hopefully some tonight will help you out a little bit. I guess one of the big things is what's the end use of that data. If you're an amateur and you're just wanting to collect a bit of data to learn about the species in your back garden or something like that, you might go for one of these. Or if you're out there actually serious and want to start collecting some monitoring data and start a program where you're doing regular counts, you might use a different one. So on the left of your screen are two of the frog sort of apps around that you can record data on. The top left one's a Melbourne water frog census, and so that's only really for the Melbourne area that has a field guide for frogs in Melbourne, and that's really great because it has some of the calls as well, so you can actually identify the calls through that app. What they do, and the bottom left one's the Australian Museum one, so that's for Australia wide. Both of them, you use your microphone on your phone to record the frog calls, and that's then sent off to professional ecologists, and they'll end up listening in and recording down what frogs they can hear, and sending back a report to you, and that contributes to atlas of where the frogs are across the region. We always sort of promote the Melbourne Water one just because we've got a sort of collaborative relationship with Melbourne Water, but really either one's great for the Nillumbik area. But it might just be a bit simpler to use the Melbourne Water one because it's sort of distinctly to the Melbourne region and should only have the half dozen or so frogs that you're likely to occur in Nillumbik. I'll get to iNaturalist and the DECA Victorian Biodiversity Atlas or VBA shortly. One of the other, for birds, there's a whole variety of apps out there. Some are just purely field guides. Some are more based around the backyard bird counts. Two of the more popular ones for monitoring or creating lists are the eBird one, which is a United States Cornell Lab based one, and Australia's BirdLife bird data app, which is obviously again more Australian based. Both of them are quite useful. I tend to lean towards the BirdLife bird data one just because it's contributing to Australian science on birds, but and it has some specific projects around threatened species such as swift parrot and Regent honeyeater, which we can use in the Nillumbik area. But yeah, both of them for just generally creating lists and that are both pretty good. And then for invasive species, there's feral scan, which we've used a lot for promoting in Nillumbik for deer and recording deer sightings. And there's a whole lot of other ones for cats and foxes and Indian miners and a whole lot of other pest animal species. And a relatively new one I'm seeing is the weed scan, which is more obviously for invasive plant species. And that has an AI component, I believe. I've actually not used that one, but that will recognize plants as well. And so it can help you ID weeds where you might see them as well. But there's a whole lot of other ones out there. And some of the other ones we sort of recommend and use include the platypus spot. So if you have seen platypus, we always recommend you put some of the platypus records out on platypus spot. Australian Conservation Foundation also have their own one, and then this is where it gets a bit confusing about whose one do you use. But there's no right or wrong really. But if you're going to start using one, I'd recommend sticking with that. So on iNaturalist and DECA's VBA or Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, people might have heard about, especially iNaturalist, have become very popular, and both of them support recording a wide range of species, but iNaturalist is a much larger project that's international. It's supported through the app on your phones and their website as well. Crucially, it's linked to the Atlas of Living Australia. For those that don't know, the Atlas of Living Australia, that's like a database, a biological database, and that's where a whole lot of data from a whole lot of apps, including iNaturalist, goes into. I'll get to a little bit of that soon. iNaturalist as an app is pretty easy to use, and there's lots of support on websites. And you know, when we use it, we tend to data is current. You know, like people were recording things today, and you can see what people recorded around you, whether it, and it's across all taxa, plants, animals, fungi, you know, insects. It's basically any living organism can be recorded on that. And that data then gets uploaded into the Atlas of Living Australia Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, some people might have heard of that. That's a state-based biological database. It has had an app in the past, but that's not working. We hear a lot of feedback about it. It's been very clunky and difficult to use and upload your data into. The biggest part of it, I guess, is that everything that goes into that is verified. So unlike Atlas of Living Australia, not everything is verified by professional ecologists, state government ecologists that want to make sure, double check people putting the right and correct data in. You're not recording a duck species and calling it a penguin or something like that. So that is a bit of a problem with Atlas of Living Australia, that some stuff in there is unverified and could be incorrect. But whereas the VBA tends to be correct, but there's a very long process in terms of getting data into it, which is especially for people that might be doing this ad hoc. It is pretty frustrating as well. But the main thing for the VBA and especially for Nillumbik is that is sort of what the state, the Victorian government use for their planning. So, if there's a development site with a threatened species on it, if it's not in the VBA, it doesn't tend to be considered, really, unfortunately. So it's a really important tool to have really critical data, input into. And we find it at the moment, unfortunately, it's pretty, not current and needs some further updates. And it does also, like Lockie sort of said before, like a lot of decision support tools. So the state government's got milling a lot towards modelling. So like saying where the highest biodiversity values in the state, a lot of it's based on modelling of, where species have been recorded, threatened species, and sort of saying, well, that's now, a high biodiversity value because the VBA says that's where a lot of our threatened species are. So even like when we're sort of saying, where we're going to do pest, animal or plant control, a lot of it's based around the background data from the VBA. I borrowed this bit of confusing slide from the State Environment Department, and I think it gives a bit of a good snapshot of how a lot of these different apps or platforms, this is some science works, if you can kind of see it. Two big centre ones are the Atlas of Living Australia and Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, and you can start getting appreciation for all the different parts that start feeding into the different ones. I guess the big one in the middle is iNaturalist, and iNaturalist has now got a lot of data. Like there's millions of records now, observations in Australia. All of those tend to go into the Atlas of Living Australia. They're not being fed into the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas. So people out there now collecting a lot of great data, but unfortunately it's just not getting to quite the right place, especially for Victoria at this time. A lot of the other things such as bird data and eBird do end up in the VBA after several years. So, if you found a threatened bird somewhere and you recorded on bird data or an eBird, it may take 5 years for its way to filter into the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, and at that time, the grassland or the forest has already been bulldozed with development. So that's where it's, really important that if you are collecting data, that it does try and get into the VBA as soon as possible. And something really keen to work with the community on, getting some of that critical data into the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas as possible. Just as a sort of comparison, these are two sort of lists that I've pulled out of the iNaturalist Living Australia, Atlas of Living Australia, and Victorian Biodiversity Atlas as comparisons. So on the left is all the butterfly records for Nillumbik. There's been, according to that atlas, been 21 species recorded in Nillumbik, and lots of that data is quite out of date. For example, things like common grassleaf butterfly, which is a very common species in a lot of backyards. The last record was 1942. But, we already know that's showing up this season in people's backyards, so it's around. Whereas on the iNaturalist Atlas of Living Australia, we've got 46 species or 48 species that have been recorded in Nillumbik on that platform, and a lot of those are recorded year in, year out. So, it just shows you the power and the amount of data going into those platforms from, citizen science and people out there recording those and putting them up in the platform. So just this shows you how behind the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas really is. Another sort of comparison is the spatial data. So on the left is Hones Hill in Eltham. The blue dots represent records of Maddox Blacksley, endangered plant that's found there on the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas. There's 3 records. On Atlas of Living Australia, there's a dozen records in that area, which are on the red on the bottom left. And then similar for Elton copper butterfly, it is actually quite, I was surprised that it is actually up to date and it has got some more records, but again, spatially, you can see on the bottom red dots, there tends to be a lot more on the Atlas of Living Australia. They're actually really concentrated and yeah, it just goes to show that the importance of getting that data. In particular, there's some of the newer sites that have been recorded by citizen scientists over the last few years. It's a bit hard to see, but Tadima Park, which is sort of the very top sort of centre dots, that was someone was out wandering and found that that new population and uploaded that into iNaturalist as well. So again, like what you're saying, that people are out there and taking some really incredible sort of records. We really thought we had all the Elton copper butterfly populations known, and then last year through things like iNaturalist, a few more populations have turned up, which is really great. We've also got again, iNaturalist is a really amazing tool in reporting weeds. So in the past 6 months, we've had 2 nationally state prohibited or national listed weed observations on iNaturalist, which have common water hyacinth, which is a really bad weed if it gets established, and Celoturiana, which is a low meter grass, so again a really bad weed. There was 2 ways through iNaturalist it picked up. The first was we've got our own weed project, and so we can, as officers in Nillumbik, see sort of weeds we want to keep an eye on through that project and monitor it semi-regularly, and jump on that if we do see new and emerging bad weeds establishing. But also through the Atlas of Living Australia, they've got a automated biosecurity alert. So basically, as soon as someone takes that and uploads it, it gets reported straight to Agriculture Victoria, and they can then go out and actually control it. It's a really amazing little bit of instantaneous reporting of those really bad weeds and to actually get things done, which is not often the case sometimes these days, unfortunately, with weeds. But in this case, both of those have been now controlled and quite quickly as well. And so on projects, we do have in Nillumbik on iNaturalist a couple of dozen sort of projects. A lot of them are based around a bit more on biodiversity related events, but we've got one large project called Nature in Nillumbik, which is all the different species which have been recorded on our iNaturalist program in Nillumbik. And it's pretty staggering. We've had nearly 70,000 observations, close to 4,000 different species in Nillumbik have been recorded. We've had over 1,500 people observe those species, and over 2,500 people identify them. So one of the great features of iNaturalist is not only are you putting up observations, but people that have got knowledge can jump in there and start identifying and confirming what you've seen as well. So that's a really great aspect of it as well for building a community. But of that, we've got roughly around 33,000 observations of plants and over 12,000 species, some of which this is not considering introduced species. So this is 12,000 introduced and indigenous or native species. So I haven't been able to break down those numbers. We've got over 1,700 species of insects that have been recorded in Nillumbik, which is just incredible, and then, you compare that to your birds, mammals, and reptiles, which only had over 200 species of those recorded. So it just goes to show you the diversity, of insects, which is a relatively poorly known group, but, astronomical sort of numbers of those. And then for even fungi, we've got close to 500 species of fungi that have been recorded in Nillumbik as well. And then we've got a few other projects, like I sort of said before. We've got a new and emerging weeds. So we've got a list of weeds we want to keep an eye out for and make sure that they don't establish as well. And then so we've got some BioBlitz projects. So in September this year, we've got a BioBlitz, which is a competition between Melbourne councils. So through September, we're encouraging people to put their observations up on iNaturalist as well. And ensure we get a whole lot of numbers of observations and people participating to beat some other councils around the place. And then we've finally got a new project which I'm working on, which is around tracking local extinction. So in that project, we've got a great big list of species which haven't been recorded, primarily on the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, but also the iNaturalist, and trying to get people out targeting to try and find those species as well within the Nillumbik area. So trying to determine if there's any, especially terrestrial plants and vertebrate animals have actually disappeared from the Nillumbik area. Yeah, iNaturalist is a great app, and as a website, so you can contribute your new observations that you add about in your garden or walking around, but you can also put up any observations. So if you've got pictures sitting on your camera, you can definitely upload those as well. You can also upload sounds. It's not as common, but people do upload sounds of birds, but also insects, people, cicadas, and a whole lot of different things. People will put up sounds of as well. One big thing is geo-privacy. So as Lockie said, all our phone picks a geo-reference. So if you don't want to know where you live, you can actually set the privacy on it. So, you don't get, people can't see all the records in your backyard. Also for threatened species, it's a really good idea to not identify exactly where they are, and you can set the privacy for that to be obscure to all other users. Yeah, and like I said, it's a great, if you've got a bit of experience and you can help identify other observations, you're always keen to get more people identifying things. The projects, if you start searching your projects, you might find other projects in your area. I use it a lot for journaling, so just remembering where I've seen things. So, and yeah, it's a really great platform for just trying to remember, I saw that plant and that I can go back there and say, what was its name again? It's a good way of tracking that. Like I said, with the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, it's really one of those platforms that it is a bit difficult to use. So I'm more than willing to help individuals or groups that might have a lot of data, especially if it's monitoring data such as nest box checks or long sort of line of orchid data, to try and help them and get that into the VBA. And we can work through bulk upload worksheets or something like that. It's not that simple compared to iNaturalist to get your data into the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, unfortunately. But all your data is useful. Like Lockie said, like new species have been discovered. We've got new populations of threatened fauna around the place that have been discovered by people using iNaturalist and uploading their data into that. We're getting a much better understanding of, where weeds are, where invasive pest animals are. But people are building great and amazing sort of lists for their, backyards or, reserves as well. So it's an amazing platform for that as well. But even any of the other apps, like I said, my suggestion, some of the sort of Melbourne waterfrog census and bird data ones that are great for people that are really keen on learning their frogs or birds as well. And yeah, so just on monitoring, if people are super keen to start monitoring, whether it's on their own private properties or on council land, feel free to talk to Lockie or I, touch base with us, and you may need permits, or we've always got sort of background info that might help you. There might be already people out there doing monitoring as well. I always start simple, so use sort of the existing tools. These platforms are amazing. They've been built by experts. People know what they're doing, so they're really great resource. And you can't go too wrong with it. And yeah, if you're sort of thinking that you want to do some monitoring, I feel a lot of the problems we have these days is there's just so much collecting data. How do you store it and how do you submit it? Like, this can be quite overwhelming as well. And yeah, Lockie's going to start having a chat about some of council's own monitoring programs. Thanks, Lockie.
Thanks, Warren. So to finish off tonight's presentation, we just got two really simple and straightforward examples of how you can participate in a citizen science kind of activity in Nillumbik. So the first one is this one from BirdLife Australia, which is the Aussie bird count. So in October every year, huge national citizen science project where you download a free app to your phone, and you basically record all of the birds that you see and hear in a certain time period on your phone, and that gets uploaded. And BirdLife use that every year, and it's been going for about 10 years, I think. So really easy to participate. You can just do it from your back step. Even if it's really simple birds, they're not always just after the rare birds. So we want to be able to track things like magpies and minor birds, and even bin chickens. That'd be great to try and track as many of those common birds as we can. So it's an excellent sort of first dip into participating in a huge national citizen science project. So on the next slide, there's some of the data from BirdLife showing how many birds they've recorded since they've been going. And you can see some of the things that they can use this data for. It's pretty amazing looking at the top 10 birds we see Australia wide, and most of us will know those birds represented in that middle slide, but also the different breakdown of the states, who's participating and when. So it's pretty awesome national project, and it's free, and you can do it from your backyard. You can drive to an amazing reserve if you want. You can contribute as many times as you like within the month of October. So the Great Aussie Backyard Bird Count is one of those ones that's super easy for a school student or classrooms to do. My two boys have both done it within their classrooms, and they get really excited when even there's the most basic and common of birds flying around their schoolyard. They love that they've contributed somehow to a big national citizen science project. So that's on the right, there's a screenshot of the app in the App Store where you can get it for free and jump in and have a look. It's also got a really good field guide built into it. So drop down menus, all that kind of stuff. It's really simple to use. So this is a good one if you've never helped out with a citizen science project before. This is a good start. So then the next way you can participate is within Nillumbik. We have a forest health monitoring program, and it's been running for a number of years now with some cameras and some audio recorders put out at multiple forest sites spread right across the Shire. And we do that in sort of spring, summer every year. And we pull in thousands of images and thousands of hours of recording. And that data itself needs to then be processed and entered. And the camera images need identification of the different animals, those kind of things. So this is ways that you can participate in a citizen science project from home. So you can do this on your laptop or your computer just from home. Get in and have a look at some of the critters that are moving around in some of our amazing forest patches here in Nillumbik. So on the next slide, there's a sample image with one of our camera stations set up with a bait station. And then in the background, there will be an audio recorder just recording the bird song for a number of weeks, 2 weeks. And you can see on the right-hand panel some of the critters that we've been capturing on camera. So on the next slide, this is the way it all works, where we have the cameras set out in the field. The identification of all the images needs to happen on a platform called Zooniverse. So if you contact us, we can give you access to that, and you can get in and help us identify what animals are in the thousands of photos that we need processing each time. And then the audio recorders, which we can use for, we've got an amazing officer called Ellie, who's looking at using artificial intelligence to recognize bird calls from the bird songs that we record. So the recordings are played through a computer, and then this AI call recognition then matches to different species. And you can also look at sort of acoustic indices, which is just a grouping together of all of those calls. So you can sort of pick out a richness of birds in a forest patch just by using this artificial intelligence. So some of those bird calls need to be matched to a pattern so that the computer, the AI program, can learn faster and more accurately the different bird calls. So it's the images and the calls that both need a little bit of our help as citizen scientists to get in and help process the thousands of images that we pull in every year. And from that, we can then select some indicator species that will indicate to us the health of the environment and those individual patches, and that'll inform the overall sort of health of forest patches within the Shire itself. So we're hoping to move this into some of our bushland reserves in the coming year as well. So we've got some baseline forest health monitoring, and then we'll be doing some of this exact camera and audio recorder work in our bushland reserves, which is really exciting. So here's just a sample of some of the images that you can be flicking through and telling us if it's a deer or a lyrebird or a possum with a joey on its back or foxes. It's really fascinating keeping track of all the feral species. So it's really handy for us looking at sort of densities and numbers of animals and what animals are found where. But we're more sort of excited about some of the more threatened animals like the phascogale in the bottom middle photograph there. So it's fascinating looking through all the pictures. But you can see there over 70,000+ images have been identified as part of this so far, and that's through Zooniverse program, which is something that you can help participate in from your computer and laptop at home. Then this is an example of the call matching process, which is through a program called Arbamon. So if you know any of your bird calls, you can contact us and get involved with this citizen science kind of bird call identification project. So clicking through and listening to lots of different calls and saying whether you think it is a cockatoo or whether you think it's something else. And so you can go through and select cockatoo, cockatoo. So this one's the white-throated nightjar. So we've asked people to look specifically or listen specifically for the white-throated nightjar calls. And if it's correct, we give it a blue tick. And if it's not a white-throated nightjar, it gets a yellow tick. And so the computer then will ignore it as part of its AI sweep of all of the bird songs. So the Zooniverse and Arbamon are two ways that you can get involved with this forest health monitoring program. So that's the two programs there. You can find those on our website on the environment pages. If you look at the forest health monitoring, and that's got all of the ways of participating. So yeah, the environment pages, forest health. So there's the two methods where you can get involved. And then there's two training programs that we ran, one on fauna monitoring and one on listening to nature. And I think those webinars are also up on our page if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the two different options there for calls and image identification. You can work out how you can help. So I think that's it, Warren.
Thanks, Lockie. Yeah, well, that's it. I might jump out and see if I can open up that the deer video or the quick snapshot of the thing. But feel free if people start got any questions. We've talked a lot over the last 30, 40 minutes. So if you do have any questions, but also interested to hear if people have other apps or programs they might use or thinking of using as well. So feel free to chuck any questions in the chat or just sing out as well.
What about that top left corner there, Warren? That play button was working the other day. But... that's all right.
It's not seemingly gonna work tonight.
It's the broken link.
I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, back in the 1930s and 40s, I don't think they would have thought the deer would have spread quite as far and as rapidly as they have in the last sort of 10, 15 years. So it's just an amazing visual of those records represented just spatially over time. It's fascinating. Watch them creep across the state. So
I'm not very happy.
Yeah, that's all right.
Maybe we can share, because that's a YouTube video, so we can share that as a video later on.
Yeah.
Did anyone have any sort of questions or thoughts? Because yeah. we do have an amazing community out there, so we're always really appreciative of people out there collecting data. And certainly, as this is sort of year one of our new biodiversity strategy, like the big focus for us is to collect more data and to set real baselines for where biodiversity is at in Nillumbik. So we really want to work with the community and groups and individuals that are really keen, and especially this year, in establishing baselines, getting the data that's, historic data out there into the Prime Biodiversity Atlas, and really, establish where things are at. And, when we did the data and looked at a lot of data when we were sort of writing the biodiversity strategy, we knew there's a lot of gaps, and still are a lot of gaps, but groups have that data, and it will really help us understand what are the biggest threats to biodiversity, and what's going on, and just really give us the idea of, we kind of sense we know what's going on, but without that data, we can't be prove it, I guess, that generally biodiversity is declining. Yeah, so the question from Lynn's about adding the data to iNaturalist as well as VBA Go. So that's a really good question. And so, like, I would really love it if iNaturalist spoke to the VBA, and unfortunately at this time it doesn't. So my sort of thing, what I've been doing with my data is slowly uploading it into the VBA, and recently I put 2,000 new plant records into the VBA for Nillumbik alone, and that took me months to transfer, but I kind of know what I'm doing. So I think what I would suggest is, if you have threatened species data, so things that are really important, that's sort of the priority, that's where we should be getting data into the VBA, rather, and because that's really critical to sort of a lot of the decision support tools and planning. So that's the number one. And then I think if you're using the data sort of more so for monitoring, then that's where we can help set up sort of a program, people to put that data into the VBA, and captured, I guess, through something like bird data or the frog census. But really, if you do have really important data, like trying to get it into the current biodiversity atlas is really pretty cool, and it will help out. Like you said, not for us now, but in the future as well.
Frank's got a question up too, Warren.
Answer that, Lockie.
Yeah, so we've got total numbers of deer removed. So Frank's question was about, do we have any record of the impact that Nillumbik's deer control program is having on deer numbers in our region? And we don't have any sort of mapping of the spread of reduction, but we've got total numbers that are taken out every year. So we do have numbers of that amount of deer removed from the system annually, and it has been increasing. And there have been lots of different sites where they're called sectors, and the different sectors have been reducing in the amount of deer we've been able to pull out from them. So it is showing that we are having an impact in those local areas where the sectors are set up. So the deer shooters are sort of targeting broader areas now and having to travel a little bit further and getting less animals out of some areas. But it is definitely a running battle where we will need to be doing this for a long period of time and thinking of other strategies on how to attack the problem. But we don't have any sort of mapping data that's as really coarse as the map that we were trying to show you from YouTube, just the spread of deer over time. We don't have that really fine scale data of exactly where the deer are in Nillumbik. So every time someone sees one, or hears one, or sees signs of one, if they can upload, that'd really help us target them.
And the state government they've done their numbers across the state, so they have got what they believe is a relatively accurate understanding of total deer numbers, and a lot of that's based on like pallet counts and transects, so counting poo in areas and turning numbers off that as well. But I mean, that's a statewide level, not a big level. So yeah, really coming down to like what numbers that professional shooters are taking out of the sector is sort of the biggest thing. But again, it'd be great to look at sort of vegetation as a way of determining change over time. So, like, are we seeing changes in the composition, vegetation structures, and species? And that might be a good way to determine.
And coming up as well, people might already be aware, but Arthur Ryler running a seminar on a new deer monitoring protocol, which is using a bunch of different monitoring tools, including cameras, looking at sort of density. And that's been running for about 4 years now, that program. So I think it's coming up in the next 2 weeks. And that's, hosted out of Arthur Ryler. So it's a collaboration between a couple of different universities and Arthur Ryler to look at really getting down into the understanding and monitoring of deer numbers. So yeah, I'll be really interested to see what they've found. They've been doing that for a long time.
Lynn just popped another question in about what was the bird app that had the threatened species project. So that's, Bird Life Bird Data is the app. It's also a website as well, which has got an amazing amount of data in it. But yeah, they've got specific projects. So one we always promote and push is the woodland birds, swift parrot, and region 20 eater surveys. So if people are familiar with, especially swift parrot, it's a migratory parrot that flies across from Tassie in autumn to the mainland to feed on a wide range of woodland eucalypt species primarily. And so BirdLife have pushed that those surveys done at to try and count the numbers. Swift parrot has been declining steadily, and current estimates are between sort of the 300 and 700 mark total bird numbers, and still declining. And so they do the winter and autumn and winter surveys. So at the moment we're in the winter period for their surveys as the birds flock together to begin their migration back to Tasmania as well. So there's a few other different projects that you can find in the app and contribute as well. If you're interested in that more, please, feel free to reach out to us as well. Oh yeah, and then Angela's got a question about advocating on the VBA. Yeah, so as a organisation, Nillumbik does advocate strongly that that they improve the VBA, but yeah, definitely contacting DECA and saying they should improve it would be great, because yeah, it is lacking. The data's quite old, and again, in sort of in defense, like they do want to verify and check everything, and so things take a long time, but it can take years to get data from ecologists, professional ecologists, or citizen scientists into the VBA. Like it really is a problem, and it really, when you compare the Atlas of Living Australia against the VBA, it's just chalk and cheese in terms of the quality of the data and the currency in particular.
Warren,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
I've got a question which I can't. It's too complicated to type. If you said that if you've got threatened species and you don't want to actually display the exact location, you can hide it sort of in when you're putting it on iNaturalist.
Yeah.
Can if that was done, the actual detailed location is embedded in the information somewhere, isn't it? So that then can that then be transferred to bird data without any other work?
Yeah.
With the real location being available to the experts.
Yeah. So the data, when if you download your data out of iNaturalist as an Excel spreadsheet, you'll see that there's the obscured data coordinates, and there is also the actual coordinates. So I think when data is uploaded out of iNaturalist into Atlas of Living Australia, unfortunately it's still obscured, and it's caused us some issues in terms of threatened species we've suddenly got glossy grass skink occurring in Nillumbik, and it's actually from across the river and Spidones and Yarra Ranges, but it's sort of showing up in our data. But you can, when you download it, you can see the sort of actual coordinates that occurred on, and then with the data I've been uploading to the VBA, I've used the actual to ensure that it's accurate when it goes into the system.
So, but can anyone download that data and find out where it is, or?
No. So it has to be the observer, I believe, or there is some sort of projects that allow, if it goes into a project, some moderators of projects can see it. I'm not sort of too familiar how with that operation, but certainly if you download your own data, you should be able to tick the box to say, see the actual coordinates of it.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah, is there any other questions out there? We do have a lot of information on council's website as well. So I did share when I some of the links to apps and that and websites, but yeah, jump onto Nillumbik's website as well, and the environment tab, you'll find a lot of this information. But so yeah, feel free to reach out to Lockie or myself. If you've got any further questions or interested in want to chat or I'll find out a bit more about how you can get involved.
I've got one other question, Warren.
Yeah, no worries, Frank.
On the website, advertising this session, there was a photo of a butterfly.
Yeah.
And I had trouble identifying. Would you like to comment on that, Warren?
Sure. So with citizen science, technology is moving at an amazing fast rate. So like the iNaturalist platform, you upload a picture and through AI, it's able to recognize whether it's a common brown butterfly or a spotted brown butterfly. But the other thing with AI is it's also creating, people can come up with obscure butterflies that can trick our people that are familiar. So the picture that advertised this session was an AI derived image of a butterfly, which I don't even know if it's a real butterfly, but it's definitely not an Australian butterfly. But technology is quite amazing and is moving rapidly. And yeah, like a lot of the platforms we're using, like even Lockie said, that you can take a sound recording of a bird and now it can identify that bird straight away. I've got a recorder in my backyard that records about 500 Indian miners and noisy miners a day and just puts it into the cloud of data. And these platforms are able to recognize a blackberry leaf and automatically and tell you that's a blackberry, not a native raspberry leaf. It's quite phenomenal technology, and in a year it moves along fast, and how we can pick up data.
And that one, Frank, was just asking the AI engine to just produce us an image showing someone holding a phone with a butterfly in the background, and it produces about a dozen different images, and you can filter and make it brighter, make the butterfly bigger. You can tell it to do all sorts of different things rather than scrolling through lots of stock footage or going at yourself and trying to take your own phone with another phone with a hand. It's amazing what it can do now, but it's definitely designed to trick the Franks out there and get them to dust off their old field guides.
Well, it did. I can tell you.
I've got a new game now, Frank. I can play with you.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks everyone for joining tonight. Yeah, again, if you've got any more questions, feel free to jump in now. But otherwise, yeah, definitely, feel free to touch base with us at any time. Any more questions? All right. Well, that's it. I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening.